Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up and prepare yourselves for a journey into the shadows of ancient history. Tonight, we delve into the mysterious and controversial world of sacred prostitution, a practice that blurs the lines between the divine and the carnal, the sacred and the profane. Picture this: ornate temples rising from the desert sands, their gilded spires piercing the heavens. Within their hallowed walls, a secret ritual unfolds, one that would make even the most libertine among us blush. For in these ancient houses of worship, sex wasn't just tolerated, it was revered as a holy sacrament. Now, I know what you're thinking. Holy prostitution? That can't be real. But oh, my friends, it was very real indeed. From the sun-baked streets of Babylon to the lush valleys of India, temple prostitution flourished for thousands of years. It was a cornerstone of religious life in many ancient cultures, believed to bring worshippers closer to the gods through the sacred act of sex. But let's rewind a bit, shall we? Cast your mind back to the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia, circa 3000 BCE. Here, in the land between two rivers, the practice of sacred prostitution first took root. The Sumerians, those crafty inventors of writing and beer, also pioneered the concept of using sex as a form of worship. At the heart of this practice was Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of love, fertility, and war. Her earthly representatives were known as hierodules, literally sacred servants. These weren't your run-of-the-mill streetwalkers, oh no. These women, and sometimes men, were respected members of the priesthood, believed to embody the goddess herself. Now imagine you're a humble farmer in ancient Sumer. The rains haven't come, your crops are failing, and you're desperate for divine intervention. What do? You march yourself down to the local temple of Inanna, of course. But instead of lighting a candle or saying a prayer, you engage in ritual sex with one of the hierodules. It's believed that through this act, you're literally joining with the goddess herself, ensuring fertility for your fields and prosperity for your family. But wait, there's more. In Babylon, things got even wilder. Ever heard of the goddess Ishtar? She was the Babylonian equivalent of Inanna, and boy did she have some interesting rituals. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, every Babylonian woman was required to sit in the temple of Ishtar and have sex with a stranger at least once in her life. Can you imagine? Sorry, honey. Gotta go do my civic duty at the temple. Don't wait up. Now, some scholars argue that Herodotus was exaggerating or misinterpreting what he saw. But there's no denying that sacred prostitution was a big deal in Babylon. The famous Code of Hammurabi, dating back to around 1754 BCE, even includes laws protecting the rights of temple prostitutes. Talk about progressive. But let's not limit ourselves to Mesopotamia. This kinky practice spread far and wide across the ancient world. In Greece, the cult of Aphrodite had its fair share of sacred prostitutes. The most famous example was in Corinth, where the temple of Aphrodite supposedly housed 1,000 hierodules. That's right, 1,000. The mind boggles at the logistics involved. And it wasn't just the ladies getting in on the action. In ancient Canaan, male priests known as kedushim engaged in ritual sex acts as part of the worship of various deities. These holy ones were seen as conduits to the divine, their bodies serving as vessels for spiritual energy. But perhaps the most enduring and well-documented tradition of sacred prostitution comes from India. The Devadasi system, which persisted well into the 20th century, saw young girls married to temple deities and expected to serve as both religious functionaries and sexual partners for upper caste men. It's a practice that blurs the line between sacred ritual and exploitation, raising uncomfortable questions about power, gender, and spirituality. Now, I can hear some of you shifting uneasily in your seats. This all sounds pretty sketchy, you might be thinking. And you're not wrong. The concept of sacred prostitution has been hotly debated by historians and religious scholars for centuries. Some argue that it's been grossly exaggerated or even entirely fabricated by later writers with overactive imaginations or ulterior motives. But here's the thing. We have evidence. Hard, archaeological evidence. Take the fascinating case of Aphrodite's sanctuary at Gravisca, an Etruscan Greek port in Italy. Excavations have uncovered countless votive offerings, including anatomically correct clay models of certain body parts. And let's just say they weren't arms and legs, if you catch my drift. Or consider the Temple of Aphrodite Porn in Abydos, Egypt. Porn literally means prostitute in ancient Greek. This wasn't some euphemism or metaphor, it was right there in the name. The temple was a major pilgrimage site, drawing worshippers from all over the Mediterranean who came to experience the goddess's blessings in a very hands-on way. But let's zoom in on one particular example that'll really make your hair stand on end. Picture this: the Grand Temple of Ishtar in the city of Erech, modern-day Uruk in Iraq. It's a sweltering summer night in 2300 BCE. The air is thick with the scent of incense and sweat. Hundreds of worshippers crowd the temple courtyard, their eyes fixed on the ziggurat looming above. Suddenly, a hush falls over the crowd. A figure appears at the top of the ziggurat, a woman dressed in shimmering robes, her face hidden behind a golden mask. She is the NTU, the high priestess of Ishtar, chosen to embody the goddess herself. As she descends the steps, the crowd parts before her like the Red Sea before Moses. The N2 makes her way to a specially prepared chamber within the temple. There, a man waits. Not just any man, but the king himself. For you see, in many ancient Near Eastern cultures, the king was believed to be the earthly consort of the goddess. And on this night, the holiest night of the year, he will prove his worthiness to rule by joining with the goddess in sacred union. Can you imagine the tension in that moment? The weight of an entire civilization resting on this ritual act? The belief that the fertility of the land, the success of the harvest, the very survival of the people depended on this sacred coupling. As the king and the N2 emerge from the chamber hours later, a great cheer rises from the crowd. The ritual has been completed successfully. The goddess is pleased. The land will prosper for another year. But here's where it gets really wild. In some versions of this ritual, it wasn't the king who got to do the deed. Oh no, it was a commoner, chosen by lot from among the worshippers. Talk about winning the ancient lottery. Now, before you start booking your time machine for ancient Babylon, let's take a step back and consider the darker side of all this. Because as titillating as these tales might be, the reality of sacred prostitution was often far less glamorous. For many of the women and men involved, this wasn't a choice. They were dedicated to the temples as children, often by families too poor to care for them. Once consecrated, they had few options beyond serving in the temple. And while some may have found power and prestige in their roles, others undoubtedly suffered abuse and exploitation. Take the Devadasis of India, for example. These servants of God were often young girls from lower castes, dedicated to temples before they were old enough to understand what it meant. While originally conceived as a way to ensure temples had a constant supply of dancers and singers, the practice eventually degenerated into a form of religiously sanctioned prostitution. At its height in the 19th century, there were an estimated 50,000 Devadasis in the temple town of Madurai alone. Can you imagine? 50,000 women and girls, all bound to a life of service they never chose. It's enough to make your blood run cold. But here's the real kicker. The practice didn't die out with the ancient world. Oh no. In some parts of India, the Devadasi system persisted well into the 20th century. It was only officially banned in 1988, and even today, there are reports of girls being secretly dedicated to temples in remote areas. And it's not just India. In Nepal, the practice of dedicating young girls as living goddesses or kumaris continues to this day. While not explicitly sexual in nature, it raises similar questions about consent, agency, and the use of young bodies for religious purposes. Now, I can hear some of you protesting. But wait, you're saying, isn't this just cultural relativism? Who are we to judge the practices of ancient cultures by our modern standards? And you've got a point. It's always tricky to apply contemporary morality to historical contexts. But that doesn't mean we can't examine these practices critically and consider their implications. Because here's the thing. Sacred prostitution, in all its forms, was fundamentally about power. The power of the gods over humans, the power of priests and kings over common people, and all too often, the power of men over women's bodies. It's a stark reminder that throughout history, sexuality and spirituality have been deeply intertwined, and that this intersection has often been a site of both transcendence and exploitation. But let's not end on such a heavy note. For all its problematic aspects, the concept of sacred prostitution also speaks to something profound in the human experience, the desire to connect with the divine through our bodies, to find the sacred in the most intimate of acts. And in some ways, isn't that what we're all searching for? A way to transcend our mundane existence and touch something greater than ourselves? To find meaning and purpose in the messy, complicated business of being human. So the next time you're feeling a little frisky, maybe take a moment to consider the long and tangled history of sex and spirituality. Who knows? You might just be tapping into an ancient and powerful tradition. But whatever you do, maybe leave the temple prostitutes out of it. Some traditions are better left in the past. And there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour through the steamy, scandalous world of sacred prostitution. From the ziggurats of Babylon to the temples of India, we've explored a practice that challenges our notions of what's sacred and what's profane. It's a reminder that human sexuality and spirituality are complex, messy, and often intertwined in ways we're still grappling with today. So the next time you're feeling judgmental about someone else's beliefs or practices, just remember, compared to sacred prostitution, it's probably pretty tame. Until next time,